I think the Venn diagram of, people who work on cutting edge AI and people who understand how dusty, operationally heavy warehouses are, the overlap of that Venn diagram is not as huge as you would think.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I've got my special guest, Jackie. Jackie, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Hey, super excited to be here. Super excited to be spending time with the audience. Yeah, I'm Jackie Wu, CEO and co-founder of Corvus Robotics. We are an AI and robotics company based in Mountain View, California. And we build the world's first and only fully autonomous drones that help warehouses scan inventory. So if you think about the world's supply chain for food, for ag, for everything else, kind of every commercial object that sat around you sat in a warehouse at one point. Your laptop, the building construction materials, your phone, your watch, whatever, clothing, right? And these companies in the physical economy all have to do inventory. And the way that every company around the world does inventory right now is pretty much, a person with a handheld barcode scanner going around with a clipboard checking off items. And it's slow and laborious, and it takes them, months to do this. So our team over here, we have built an autonomous flying robot using AI and lots of sensors in order to fly around these massive warehouses and check inventory for you. And it does this, substantially faster than people. We can get turns, every couple of days instead of once a year or something like that. And you kind of have to imagine these warehouses being these massive facilities the size of 10 football fields going up 4 stories high. So it's no trivial task for a team of human inventory checkers to go and do it, whereas the robot can do it and doesn't get tired. And, it's a job that people don't particularly want to do. That's a little bit about us and what we've been building as our first product, and happy to dive into the rest of the show.
Superb. It's funny when people mention warehouses and the size of warehouses to me, I'm often reminded of the last scene in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you see this pallet being wheeled into this warehouse, and then the camera backs back and back and back, and you see just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands more of identical pallets in this warehouse that just goes on forever. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
let's take a step back, Jackie, and let's talk to me a little bit first about the origin story of Corvus. How did you wake up one morning and decide to kick this off?
Yeah, I mean, especially apropos because you're wearing, I think, your Indiana Jones hat. Uh, yeah, I was in grad school at Northwestern in Chicago for robotics, and kind of a warehouse nerd in that I've been to warehouses in 10 countries. It's like a stop that I do sometimes when I'm abroad. And what I realized was that these warehouses all around the world, in Asia, in Europe, in South America, in North America, all basically look the same. These warehouses, to your point, they're just endless racks just going on, stretching as far as you could see. And it's just, it's pallets, it's cases, inventory coming in and out for all different types of goods, all different types of industries. And pretty much all of them, something like 97, 98% of them all do check their inventory in this very manual way. Like around the world, it's just people with barcode scanners. And so, in grad school, the thought was, why can't we do it better with the latest wave of AI and robotics coming out? There's got to be something that we can do to improve this process by 10 times, an order of magnitude, if not 100 times.
Mm-hmm. Why were you a warehouse nerd? How come you'd visited warehouses in all these countries? What's that all about?
I think early on, as a kid or as a teenager, I think what motivated me was thinking about like, what is my life about and what is the biggest kind of impact I can make, right? And one of the things that really resonated with me was the physical economy. And, we're kind of seeing it now with some of the political events going on. But as a Chinese American, right, I've seen the ancestry going back to see my grandparents. It's like China has developed materially very quickly over the past few decades. And in doing so, it was a lot of the physical economy, which is how every country has industrialized. Like people need stuff, like, right?
Yeah.
Like life-saving medicines, food, perishables, household appliances, all your newest gadgets and gizmos. People like forever since the dawn of time and up until now, people need, physical items, and all these items need to be tracked.
Mm.
So this is like this sort of like a core part of the world economy, from the most far-flung island nations to the smallest European, microstates. Every country has warehouses, and it's the backbone of, the supply chain is the backbone of the world.
Mhm.
And so when I was thinking about, in grad school, how can I apply the stuff that I'm learning to kind of help update the economy, right? It's like this is clearly something that is not going away. That will always be here, and it will be supply chain is always going to be here, and checking inventory is always going to be a function. And I think one of the insights that I had early on in talking to a lot of these operations, warehouse, supply chain managers is that inventory accuracy, like everything flows downstream of inventory accuracy. You kind of have to know what is where in order to operate a warehouse, right? To know what to pick, what to put away, what to replenish, and so on. And so, it was kind of that starting point that was like, okay, if this is really important, maybe this is something that we can address, right? And it's a perennial need.
And how big a blind spot is inventory accuracy right now? I mean, do you think it's something that's overlooked, or is it something that's really important?
Yeah, I think the Venn diagram of, people who work on cutting edge AI and people who understand how dusty, operationally heavy warehouses are, that, the overlap of that Venn diagram is not as huge as you would think. Yeah. Usually you're either a robotics nerd or a supply chain and operations nerd, and not both. And I think inventory is one of those things. Yeah, maybe now with some of the newest sort of focuses in the market on reindustrializing and kind of looking at hard tech, it's a little bit more popular. But when we started, I mean, going through Y Combinator in 2018, we were the only company focused on this space. And no one, people were like warehouses, like, but what the heck, right? We could be building a B2B SaaS app or something. So I think it's so core and so prime to all of the physical things around us, but we don't think about it. None of us really think about all of the sort of frontline workers, essential workers in all the warehouses, keeping them operational day to day, starting their day at 6 a.m. that get us all the stuff that we have.
Sure. And I mean, manual inventory counting, as you said, that guy with the
The
scanner and
barcode
the
scanner. Yeah.
clipboard. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
why is that still the norm for a lot of warehouses in 2025?
You ask me, Tom. I ask who. I'm reminded of these like old Egyptian cuneiform tablets, some of the oldest human text, and it's like, they finally deciphered them, and their inventory lists. It's like, what has been in my granary, right? Like I have this many stockpiles of whatever. That's basically where we are. In a couple thousand years, the latest innovation has been a handheld barcode scanner and barcodes. And so the vast majority of warehouses are these very manual type of places where they're also struggling with, at least here in the US, with sort of labor costs and the labor pool. Most people don't want to work in warehouses. This is not like thrilling, exciting jobs. Checking inventory as your full-time job, going up and down aisles, to your point, those thousands and thousands of pallets, they all look the same. Every aisle looks the same. You're supposed to find one among, needle among the haystack. It's not a fun job. And so I think one of the promises of AI and robotics is to hopefully, right, free us from the drudgery of work that's just very dull and boring, dull, dirty, and dangerous. When you think about warehouses that go up 4 stories tall, 40 feet in the air, people can't fly. So they're taking these scissor lifts and strapping themselves on with a safety harness going up there, and it's wobbly, and you're hoping it's not stuck. And, I don't know, like I got a fear of heights, man. Like I wouldn't want to do it.
And how did you settle on drones? Because I've had another company on the podcast before who's doing a similar thing, but they're doing it with these robots that have a very long vertical arm and multiple cameras on the arm going up so they can scan multiple rows of a warehouse at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When we started, we were solution agnostic, so we were looking at different ways to solve this problem, right? Naively, we thought, what if we put a ton of cameras all over the warehouse? And it turns out that, if your facility is the size of 10 football fields, that's a lot of cameras, that's a lot of wires, it's a lot of maintenance. You can't really do that. So then we thought, sort of, what about a ground robot with this sort of mechanical giraffe of a neck with a bunch of cameras on it, to your point, right? And I think that is a valid solution. I think it's actually a very good solution, but it occupies a slightly different niche for our customers in terms of price point and in terms of operational complexity. If that big thing is in an aisle, that is blocking the aisle. No one is going in the aisle. And the cost is about an order of magnitude more than the drones. So sort of, if you think of like a 2x2 matrix of sort of price and performance, you see that type of item, somewhere over here. If you get more expensive, you see maybe like an ASRS system. Even more expensive, you think of sort of those fully 3D ASRS systems like, Exotech, or, they look like a beehive of robots, right? It's just orders of magnitude of increased complexity and increased sort of performance. But one of our insights was the cycle counting team for checking inventory, even though it's really important, it occupies a very small percentage of the warehouse's total budget and labor force, right? So if you've got 100 people in a warehouse, the majority of those people are picking, and receiving, and they're doing things that actually move the inventory. You usually only have a handful of folks checking inventory. And so you kind of have to justify the ROI within that budget, because that's what people are going to be benchmarked against, right? So there's other ROI beyond the labor, but that's what people are going to be thinking about. When we were starting Corvus, it was thinking, what is the smallest, cheapest, most economical, least disruptive type of form factor in robotics today that can still go up 40 feet in the air? And that happened to be the latest research coming out on micro aerial vehicles or drones today. So these are small, it fits on the palm of your hand. It's a couple pounds, a couple kilograms, and it easily goes up as high as you want it to, 40 feet, 60 feet, because it flies, right? So, it's a very small form factor that doesn't block the aisle. So it kind of occupies our own little niche that's kind of tailored to the realities of the warehouse, the warehouse's budget and ROI constraints.
And if I have a massive 10 football field warehouse, to your point, do I need a fleet of drones? Will one drone do? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it an it depends answer?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends, on the frequency that you want the counts. So you got to think these are like big companies, some of the biggest companies in automotive, aerospace, consumer packaged goods, healthcare, whatever, right? So they have these like mandates internally from some kind of finance team of how frequently they have to do this. And so, if it's more frequent, so you could kind of picture this massive facility with a lot of pallets, having a small fleet of drones, less than a dozen, kind of flying by, kind of waking up, doing their morning duty, doing the afternoon duty, flying overnight when no one's in the facility, and all working in unison to make sure that the inventory in that facility across many different aisles are, at the same time being updated with inventory checks. Now, we've also had some very small facilities. We joke that the smallest unit that you can place is one drone. You cannot order half of a drone. I cannot chop it in half and deliver it to you, right? So, for some of the smaller facilities, that's something that we do qualify. We got to make sure, that either the inventory is high value enough to justify having a drone, or that you need it counted very frequently, for sustainability or for expiration type of reasons. And so, it's quite flexible in that the lowest point is can be quite lower than a lot of traditional automation, which involves a lot of, metal and steel and kind of costs there associated. But also we could flexibly increase to, a fleet of vehicles.
And do they talk to each other peer to peer to share information and avoid collisions and things like that? And as well, do they then share the data they've got? I assume they have to share it back to an ERP system or a WMS or something like that. How does all that work?
Yeah, so the drones have a lot of software and AI on them that talks to each other and to the landing pads. The landing pads are actually sort of mini supercomputers that have a lot of processing and data storage on them. Because, the drones are collecting a lot of pictures and videos and sort of 3D, environmental models, like a digital twin of the facility. And so that takes storage. And on the back end, all of this syncs with the local WMS, warehouse management software, which is usually a branch of or, attached to the ERP, right? So SAP has their EWM, or, some folks are using separate ERPs in Manhattan or something. And even some of the more niche WMSs, homegrown WMSs, we've integrated. Because at the end of the day, the integration is quite simple. It's just what inventory is where, when, right? So it's just a couple of fields. But what's interesting is much more of the rich data that we collect just hasn't been possible to collect before. Before, when it was, a guy with their cuneiform tablet, notepad and barcode scanner, that's what they're writing down. But now there's all this sort of pictures, videos, historical pictures looking back a month ago, something moved here, computer vision and machine learning analytics to look at occupancy and count and tie high and all these other kind of things. It's a very interesting age that we are in now with computer vision and machine learning and being able to analyze all of this data. Like, this wouldn't have been possible a decade ago or even 5 years ago, I think.
Yeah. I got to ask, what's the most surprising thing any of your clients have found when they've gone shooting drones around their warehouses?
I think for one of our, customers, can't say who, but more heavy industrial. So, some of these pallets are worth a lot of money, easily six figures. On the first day, on one of the first flights, we found a pallet that, was high up, so people hadn't seen it. And they were like, oh yeah, that is worth, six figures, XXXXXX. And we just reordered that a few weeks ago because we couldn't find it. And it's like, first of all, there's your ROI. Thank you very much. Second of all, like, yeah, if we were flying this every single day, you would be able to find, all of the stuff substantially faster. It's a thing, man. Like, we talk about sustainability, supply chain resilience, but at the core of it, you kind of have to know what is actually in your supply chain and how it's moving. And the previous data collection methods was very much garbage in, garbage out.
I got to think as well, if you are flying through warehouses, you're identifying probably not just what's in the rows, but also where there's nothing. So that should mean that you can fill the warehouses even more that was possible before. You got to be able to optimize the occupancy of the warehouse, no?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one. I mean, you were entirely right, Tom. That is one among some of the very interesting sort of analytics things that are kind of starting to emerge as we're collecting more and more of this data across, different companies' kind of, American footprints, right? If we're in multiple facilities or across their entire footprint, it's like, we can optimize what is in that facility and how do you store it more efficiently, right? These are your items that are picked the fastest. Maybe we should have them on the ground level instead of, 30 feet in the air. And then also, like, how do we optimize cross facility kind of shipments? There's sort of a lot of folks have dedicated software and rules for this, but we could tell you exactly on the ground, like, how many pallets of this you have today and how many pallets are in the other regional warehouse. And, oh, you've got a big demand coming up from sort of historical analysis. This is what we got to do. So there's a lot of interesting things that are coming to play now that we have this sort of early critical mass of data that we can play with. And that kind of leads me to think that sometime in the future for the supply chain, it is going to be a lot more AI driven, a lot more data driven in a way that just wasn't possible before. You're kind of seeing that with, with AI and LLMs, of course, but all of it is math and data science with a new name and maybe more data. But I think a lot of the world's physical economy will become more and more optimized through AI. And we want to be a key piece in collecting that data.
And does this then allow for the likes of real-time inventory knowledge, because you talked about before people doing inventory once a year, and now presumably if they have drones flying around, or even a drone flying around if it's a small facility, they should have pretty much up to the hour, up to the day at least, inventory lists.
Yeah, basically. I mean, there's a little bit of nuance there in that I would say that you don't want to over collect inventory data.
Mm-hmm.
So, you wouldn't want to scan the same location 1,000 times if it hasn't moved, right? If it's,
Sure.
if you have, if your warehouse has on average, a couple hundred moves or something, and you're scanning 100,000 locations a day, then it's like, what are the other 999,000 scans for, right? This is an overbuilt system. But to your point, it's like now we have the inventory visibility and the sort of expediency of that, so that we could find root causes. Before, if you were scanning things once every 6 months, once every 4 months, that means if a problem happened, on average, it happened 3 months ago. Like what, I have no idea where that case of, whatever liquor or something left. But now, with AI and Corvus drones, you can say, hey, here's pictures of yesterday at 7 a.m. when something changed, right? And we can kind of root cause and do that kind of inventory research a lot better, which is, it's a shift in how the world economy will move. My hope is that the world economy, like that we will contribute to positively to economic growth, which would be amazing.
And in an age where a lot of startups are outsourcing their hardware, what's the case for owning the full stack? Because you do it all yourselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, we build in-house, and we've done that, since before it was politically cool. So that's our little pat on the back. We build here in California. It was actually out of necessity rather than, sort of, how do you do this right is the question that we asked ourselves early on. Because, initially we tried every drone out there. There's this sort of naive view that like a drone is a drone. That's why people who like don't know anything about the drone industry, right? It's like, yes, DJI makes great consumer hobbyist drones. For when you go skiing, the drone will follow you and take amazing footage that you could show your dog or whatever. And when we started, we tried every off-the-shelf drone out there, whether it was DJI, Skydio, there's this French company Parrot, there's this South Korean company UV5. We've tried all these drones. A lot of them were amazing, but for their specific use case, right? Whether drone light shows or this kind of camera photography stuff. And there's just nothing out there that would actually satisfy what the customer wanted for autonomous warehouse inventory drones. So we had to build our own. And building our own meant that we would control our own AI stack on the hardware and software. And this is key to delivering actual autonomy in a space where, autonomy is really hard. You could think of the Corvus drones as essentially a self-driving car that fits on the palm of your hand that flies, right? And so we kind of have to build that from the ground up, from the sensors, the compute. You just sort of calibrating all of it with the software and the AI in order to get this all to work. And that's been a large endeavor. So that's been kind of key to our success and initial scale, I would say, in having the years of painful work building it ourselves. Yeah.
Sure. And I obviously, building it yourselves, the drones have inbuilt sensors, not just for photographing the shelves, but also for collision avoidance. They're fully autonomous, so I assume it's wireless charging when they go back to the drone pad. I assume you can auto-schedule them as well, so that they go out maybe at nighttime when there's nobody there, or if it's 24-hour one, they probably know the aisles that are being used at any particular point in any particular day, avoid them and go for the other ones, or talk me through all that.
Yeah, you're totally right, Tom. I think you have a product mind, and that's very nice. I mean, you are absolutely right in thinking about, what would the customer actually want for if you're a warehouse manager, what do you want this thing to do? You want it to be pretty much hands-free, right? If you were paying your warehouse workers a certain dollar per hour, you don't want them to also be managing a drone. That's not the point of you hiring this robot, right? And so you want it to be fully autonomous, fully recharging, intelligently planning. No one should even have to hit go on a scheduler. It just auto schedules. or you could request it to schedule, if you want to check a particular aisle that day or particular location or whatever, right? Collision avoidance is essential. You need to be able to, so we've got 12 cameras all around it to see everything around it in every sort of, and collision avoidance software. And so, these are kind of all table stakes at this point. But, in the drone space, in this drone niche that I talked about, sort of for micro aerial vehicles, we are currently, as far as I know, the only player in the world that does this for, it's fully autonomous and there's nobody involved and there's no sort of location stickers or beacons or whatever, which is pretty interesting. And kind of that base is the foundation, that technology is the foundation for a lot of the, some of these new product lines that we've been launching, which we'll talk about in, perhaps a future conversation. Yeah. So, there's a lot of work behind the scenes to get it all work on the AI side, but the payoff is massive if we can build an actual autonomous system inside of, the world's busiest industrial environments.
And are there any big sustainability wins that you can talk about? I mean, I know you talked about that one pallet that one customer found, but any other big sustainability wins?
Yes. So I will, limit to what is public so I don't get myself in trouble. But for some of our food and ag customers and medicine, pharmaceutical customers, like these guys, they have products that have expiration codes. This is not like a chair, which you can, kind of sit in the warehouse for, 5 years and, it's still a chair. It might be out of style, which is a different thing, but coming up to a month before the expiration date, you soon cannot sell that item, and that impacts people's health, right? And so these are something that is pretty important for sustainability and reducing waste, reducing just the massive amount of, things that go into landfill. Okay, I mean, if you cannot sell it, like that is trashed, right? And so that's a monetary loss, but also a loss for sustainability that, could have been, we could have done that more efficiently. And so I think it's very good that much of the industry is looking at a lot of these sustainability initiatives, both from, reducing material handling emissions, this kind of stuff. I mean, the drones are electric, right? It's green energy in that sense, but also in terms of the amount of loss and wasted products. So we're happy to make our contribution there.
And how are things like shifting tariffs and sourcing strategies influencing inventory decisions right now?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the tariff stuff, I think for a lot of companies, it is some uncertainty. In the robotic space, many of our vendors, key vendors are American, but some are overseas because there's certain components that are only made overseas and component parts, and just there's no alternative. So over time, we hope to build more and more of the sort of the, upstream components ourselves, which is kind of an interesting technique to kind of vertically integrate. But ultimately, you look at, these large companies, Skydio, for example, or, this large American company earlier this year, and they make these amazing, their autonomy is incredible, but they faced supply chain challenges from Asia earlier this year. Like they could not get their batteries, they could not ship any units. And so kind of similar for some of the other, robotic manufacturers for, whatever it is, actuators to flight controllers or something like that. And so it is a question of, the tariffs and the supply chain instability, uncertainty always is there, but it's a form of, strength, building up strength and being able to build all this in-house and kind of vertically integrate more and more of that stack.
Where do you see the biggest opportunity for AI and automation in the next 5-10 years? And flip side of that, where do you think the hype is outpacing reality?
Yeah, Tom, I think that's a super interesting question because you're seeing these massive investments by all these large tech companies. NVIDIA is the world's first $4 trillion company, right? Like that's massive, right? 10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought it was possible. And you're seeing these massive bets. And so far, most of them have been in software, right? They've been in LLMs. They've been in, for sort of the software, for specific verticals that build on top of that and to support this and that. But you're starting to see a lot of this investment in hardware too. And there is a particular approach for the building of hardware with, the vertically integrated AI stack and data sort of feedback loop of data capture and iteration, that companies that have not just the smartest engineers, but also sort of the ability to collect that data are going to win out massively. Like, it is going to be a power law type of return where it'll be night and day, basically a step function in night and day in being able to have these hardware devices out actually collecting data versus sort of an R&D project with, cool reinforcement learning in the lab. And I think that's where some of the hype is, respectfully, but some of these companies that have raised a lot of money, but their products are in the lab, or they're not quite doing anything useful. So some of these companies remind me a little of the autonomy, self-driving space, maybe close to a decade ago now. There's not going to be that many self-driving winners, just like there are not as many as are being massively funded, same as for some of these humanoid companies.
Sure. What are your plans for Corvus then for the next 5-10 years?
Ooh, we are in a good position and lucky position to be in a position of financial strength and business strength and stability, which is very nice. We can choose how we want to, what kind of paths we want to take. But there's some very ambitious things that we see with the core technology that we've built for autonomous warehouse inventory scanning drones. On the AI and computer vision, machine learning, hardware, a lot of the key components that we've been building for the past several years are kind of all coming into place. And so there's some sort of bigger plans around sort of in this wider space where we think we can make a unique contribution to the world, and for supply chain, for making, the physical economy more efficient. I think that is the next biggest opportunity in the world, which is fascinating to be working on.
Interesting. Have you ever had a warehouse worker give your drone a nickname?
Yeah, that's always a fun one. I think one of the facilities that had two, they called them Bonnie and Clyde. Some of the other, after Disney characters or Disney princesses, we joke about maybe one of these days we're gonna put some googly eyes on the drones and it's make them a lot more fun. I think it's an opportunity to delight customers and to make people feel happier. So we try to have fun with folks whenever we can.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. We have a robot to clean the pool, and we call it Wally. So those kind of things, they're always good.
Yeah.
A left field question for you, Jackie. If you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a champion for drones in warehouses, who would it be and why?
Probably Lee Kuan Yew, the sort of founder of Singapore. There's a lot of mythos there, but I think, there's some very interesting ways in which he thought about building. I think there's some analogs there to startup land, right? Here I am running a humble business, but I think there's some analogs there in state building and how to sort of optimize the economy for the well-being of its people that I think would be very interesting to learn from.
Nice. Okay, very good. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Jackie. Is there any question that I didn't ask that you wish I did, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I think you've largely touched on it, on everything that I wanted to. I think some of the manufacturing pieces of the importance of building in-house, sort of the future of AI in the physical economy and the importance there, and clearly sort of the importance of inventory accuracy in warehouses in a way that provides ROI for customers. This is all stuff that I think about every day. So, really glad to be here, and I appreciate your time, Tom.
Fantastic. Jackie, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
They should go to corvusrobotics.com, Corvus robotics.com. There's live videos. You can see the drones fly autonomously, read some of the case studies. Everything's on there, and reach out to our team and we'll take care of you.
Fantastic. Jackie, thanks a million for coming on the podcast today. It's been really fascinating.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.